This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about whether Microsoft is about to buy Bitcoin, but first some necessary background. How do corporations die? How do they go out of business? There are many different ways, but the main ways are through extreme competition with other companies leading to the erosion of margins or some sort of technological change that takes them out of the business. Also taking on too much debt to juice return on equity. This is a very common trap. If your return on assets is very low, you try to juice it by using debt, and that can end up blowing up your company. Also making dumb acquisitions, buying other companies that don't really add anything to your company, and there may even be a clash of culture between the acquired company and the acquirer. Also melting balance sheets. This is another way that corporations die. Holding lots of cash and other investments that fail to keep up with inflation. Here's a great example. In multiple interviews over the years, Michael Saylor has spoken about how close he was to selling MicroStrategy before he discovered Bitcoin. There had been a lot of consolidation in the business intelligence software industry, and large competitors like Microsoft were eating everyone's lunch. So what were Saylor's options, as he talks about in these videos? He could use MicroStrategy's large cash reserves to buy another company in the same industry, but as we said, the track record of mergers in that industry, and really every industry, is and was quite abysmal. Mergers are great for the investment bankers and the consultants who like to push them, but they rarely work out well for the firms involved. Now, Saylor's other option was to keep sitting on MicroStrategy's cash hoard and hope that some other opportunities emerged. But the problem with this was that MicroStrategy's cash hoard was a melting ice cube, losing purchasing power every year, as it does for every company, and especially in the wake of the huge amounts of money printing that Saylor observed were taking place in early 2020. So instead of buying another company, MicroStrategy, of course, ended up buying Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was and is the perfect solution to the problem of having a melting ice cube on your balance sheet in the form of bonds and fiat cash. Bitcoin buys time for your company. It allows your CEO to make low time preference decisions for the company, prioritizing long-term goals over short-term gimmicks that juice quarterly earnings. So Bitcoin basically saved MicroStrategy. This brings us to the larger problem of corporations that hold a lot of cash on their balance sheets. This has been a perennial problem for big tech companies that generate oodles of cash, and the traditional solution has been either to use this cash to buy back the stock or invest the cash in quote-unquote super safe instruments like US Treasuries. Now, US Treasuries, which are just US government bonds, they don't have any default risk since the government can always print up some fresh money to pay interest and principal. But US Treasuries are constantly bleeding purchasing power since the investment returns that they offer are almost always below the true rate of inflation. So for example, if you're earning 4% on a treasury, but the US dollar is losing 8% in purchasing power every year, you're basically losing 4% of your capital every year. And that's a very strong headwind to stock performance. It's also a complete waste of economic energy. It's like flushing civilizational capital down the toilet. And unfortunately, it's also how the US government steals from all of us, individuals, households, and corporations alike, in order to finance its nefarious activities through this stealth inflation money printing tax. More about this in my previous video, which I'll link to in the description notes below if you want to go down this particular rabbit hole. Now, like so many other things, Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin is the solution to melting ice cube balance sheets. Why hold subpar investments on your company's balance sheet when you can hold Bitcoin instead? And MicroStrategy has really pioneered this approach. And now what we're going to be talking about today is a public policy group that wants Microsoft to get in on the game as well. But before we talk about that, I just ask you, if you're enjoying this video so far, to help to support this channel, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video. Share this video with a friend or family member, and then you can also leave a tip if you want by clicking the thanks button. You can also join by clicking the join button to get some members only videos, and I'll put a link in the pinned comment in the description note for that. So this is the proxy statement that will be voting on this proposal to have Microsoft consider putting Bitcoin on its balance sheet. We can see that the mail-in vote ends on December 9th, and then the shareholder meeting is on December 10th. And if we scroll down here on the ballot, we can see number 5, assessment of investing in Bitcoin. The board recommends a vote against this proposal. Now, what does this proposal look like? Proposal number 5, assessment of investing in Bitcoin. And this was put forth by the proposed by the National Center for Public Policy Research, and they advised the company they intend to submit the following proposal for consideration at the annual meeting. Now, this is a little bit long, but I wanted to read through most of it because I think it's a really excellent statement, and it gives us a good idea of what's going on here. Bitcoin diversification assessment. So the supporting statement in favor of this proposal: in periods of consistent and often rampant inflation, a company's financial standing is unfortunately measured not only by how well it conducts its business, but also by how well it stores the profits from its business. Corporations that invest their assets wisely can and often do increase shareholder value more than more profitable businesses that don't. Therefore, corporations have a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value, not only by working to increase profits, but also by working to protect those profits from debasement. The average inflation rate in the U.S. over the last 4 years, according to the CPI, which is a remarkably poor and corrupt measure of inflation, as we've mentioned many times on this channel, the average inflation rate over the last 4 years, according to the CPI, is about 5%, peaking at 9.1% in June 2022. But in reality, the true inflation rate is significantly higher than that, with some studies estimating it to be nearly double the CPI times. So corporations' assets have needed to appreciate at those rates over the last 4 years just to break even. This is what we're talking about, where your investments have to exceed the benchmark of inflation. Otherwise, you're losing purchasing power. As of March 31st, 2024, Microsoft Corporation has $484 billion in total assets, the plurality of which are U.S. government securities and corporate bonds that barely outpace inflation, if assuming that the CPI is accurate, which it isn't, so bond yields are actually lower than the true inflation rate. Therefore, in inflationary times like these, corporations should and perhaps have a fiduciary duty to consider diversifying their balance sheets with assets that appreciate more than bonds, even if those assets are more volatile short time. As of June 25th, 2024, the price of Bitcoin increased by 99.7% over the previous year, outperforming corporate bonds by roughly 94% on average. Over the past 5 years, the price of Bitcoin increased by 414%, outperforming corporate bonds by roughly 411% on average. And now they refer to MicroStrategy as a pioneer in this area. MicroStrategy, which, like Microsoft, is a technology company, but unlike Microsoft holds Bitcoin on its balance sheet, has had its stock outperform Microsoft stock this year by 313%, despite doing only a fraction of the business that Microsoft has. And again, Microsoft has historically been a huge competitor to MicroStrategy. And they're not alone, meaning MicroStrategy is not alone. The institutional and corporate adoption of Bitcoin is becoming more commonplace. Microsoft's second largest shareholder, BlackRock, offers its clients a Bitcoin ETF. So just a reminder to Microsoft, the board, and the CEO that BlackRock is a large shareholder both in Microsoft, in MicroStrategy, and obviously it offers the spot Bitcoin ETF, IBIT, in the US. The proposal goes on to end, Bitcoin is a more volatile asset at the moment than corporate bonds, so companies should not risk shareholder value by holding too much of it. However, as Bitcoin is an excellent, if not the best, hedge against inflation, and corporate bond yields are less than the true inflation rate, companies should also not risk shareholder value by ignoring Bitcoin altogether. At minimum, companies should evaluate the benefits of holding some, even just 1% of its assets in Bitcoin. Resolved, shareholders request that the board conduct an assessment to determine if diversifying the company's balance sheet by including Bitcoin is in the best long-term interests of shareholders. So this is a proposal just to do the research. It's not even a proposal to put it on the balance sheet immediately. And the board is recommending a vote against this proposal, saying that the proposal requests that the board conduct an assessment that is unnecessary because Microsoft's management already carefully considers this topic. Microsoft Global Treasury and Investment Services team evaluates a wide range of investable assets, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes on to note, as the proposal itself notes, volatility is a factor to consider in evaluating cryptocurrency investments for corporate treasury applications that require stable and predictable investments to ensure liquidity and operational funding. But as the proposal already suggests, you can just put 1% in, so that's not really a concern. So this is not a proposal I expect to past, but it's nevertheless quite interesting. It looks like Michael Saylor is on the sidelines here watching as well. Hey, CEO of Microsoft, if you want to make the next $1 trillion for Microsoft shareholders, call me. This is great to see on Twitter. It's one of the nice things, seeing CEOs talking to each other. And it looks like Adam Back and Samson Mow have both been to visit Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. And this is actually an old picture. This isn't them visiting in order to talk about this proposal, but presumably when they visited together, they had some conversations about Bitcoin. So this is definitely coming to the forefront. If we take a look at the top institutional holders for Microsoft, it's very similar to many of these large companies that are held by mutual funds and ETFs, which means that the parent companies of those end up being the top holders and the top voters. So Vanguard currently owns a little over 9% of Microsoft's shares, and BlackRock owns 7.45%. So as fiduciaries for the people who hold their mutual funds and ETFs, Vanguard and BlackRock will be voting on this proposal, and it will be interesting to see which way they side. Normally, companies and large institutional asset managers will go along with the board's recommendations, which in this case is to vote against this. But this is a different situation simply because BlackRock has become so pro-Bitcoin. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Reminder that when BlackRock liked ESG, every single large publicly traded company had to have an ESG strategy. Now BlackRock likes Bitcoin. So what do you think is going to happen next? And it looks like even Bitcoin-hating Vanguard, which has historically not liked Bitcoin, may pivot under the new CEO who actually supported BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF launch when he was still at BlackRock. So these are the top two shareholders here. Very interesting to see a proposal. And if we take a look at where Microsoft stands in terms of asset size, it's the top third stock in the world today by market cap, third only to NVIDIA and Apple. And if we scroll down here, we can see that Bitcoin is still in the top 10 assets, just under Meta. And this gives you an idea how cheap and undervalued Bitcoin is, because Meta it's an important company, but certainly not as important as new money for the world. And you can buy all the Bitcoin in the world right now for less than the market cap of Facebook. So expect to see Bitcoin continue to climb up the ranks of these top assets as well. And this is because everything is going to zero against Bitcoin eventually. All stocks, bonds, real estate, gold, etc. And even Microsoft itself has been trending to zero against Bitcoin for many years. The only way for any company to reverse this trend is to load up on Bitcoin itself. As the saying goes, if you can't beat it, you might as well join it. Here's a chart of Microsoft, and we can see here how it's underperformed Bitcoin for many, many years. But if they put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, that can help to reverse this. And they do have quite a bit of cash. If we look as of the second quarter, quarterly report, as of June 30th, 2024, they have cash and cash equivalents of approximately a little 75.5 billion, and of that it looks like, call it $48-50 billion is in US government securities. In other words, is in treasuries. Now to put that number in perspective, call it $49 billion worth of US treasuries. That's equal to the entire market cap of MicroStrategy with all the Bitcoin that it owns. So a deployment of capital by Microsoft into Bitcoin would be quite large, and would definitely set a precedent for other large tech companies. Now, is buying Bitcoin for their balance sheet a distraction, as some people say, a distraction from Microsoft's core business? No, I think it's actually the opposite, because large tech companies with large cash hoards do spend a lot of time and money and energy managing cash flow and trying to hedge their cash holdings against inflation. And when Microsoft buys a T-bill or a T-note or other US Treasury, they'll eventually need to reinvest both the interest income and the principal, the maturing principal from these treasuries. T-bills themselves mature every 3 to 12 months, so this maturing cash needs to be constantly redeployed. Not so with Bitcoin, which is like a perpetual call option on inflation and monetary debasement, which we know will always be with us. And Bitcoin is a pristine, neutral asset with no expiration and no maturity date and no degradation degradation as well. If you put Bitcoin on your balance sheet, it's really one and done, unlike putting US Treasuries on your balance sheet. By contrast, fiat money and US Treasuries are melting ice cubes. They need to be constantly managed, and they cause you to underperform inflation and lose purchasing power as a household or as a business like Microsoft. When a company puts Bitcoin on their balance sheet, though, they're buying themselves time. They're making it much more risky for anyone to short their stock, since Bitcoin could spike and drag the stock up sharply at any time. When you add Bitcoin to your company finances or household finances, you end up fortifying them. And in less than 10 years, I think every single company in the S&P 500 will have some Bitcoin on its balance sheet. And those that don't, they simply won't be able to compete and will be forced out of the index by their competition, just as MicroStrategy is climbing the ranks as we speak. And this is because Bitcoin is the superior savings asset for households, corporations, endowments, pensions, and eventually nation states as well. Today, all of these entities hold the world's current global reserve asset, which is US Treasuries. But in 10 years from now, the major global reserve asset will be Bitcoin. So today, you're in an excellent position to front run all of these future adopters of Bitcoin. And if you think Bitcoin is expensive here, you have no idea what's coming. Of the big tech companies, only Tesla owns some Bitcoin. Just wait until Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Apple, and Meta start bidding for Bitcoin. And then wait until the bidding war erupts between China. The bidding war for Bitcoin erupts between China, Russia, and the US. And that's how we easily get to $10 million Bitcoin. We're still very, very early, so make sure you plan accordingly. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.